Today we're going to talk about modernism.
The 1920s was a time of extreme prosperity, and opulence is extreme wealth. This was a time of great social change. Roles of women are changing. Women are becoming more independent. Women entering the workforce as teachers, nurses, secretaries, and etc. And the women earned less money than men in their workplace. Then birth control became available and popular. Marriages was based on romance rather than practicality.
The 18th Amendment was passed in the 1920s that made it illegal to produce, sell, or transport alcohol. People created speakeasies, which were establishments that sell alcohol illegally. Bootleggers were people who made illegal alcohol and sold it. Organized crime was mostly used to make money and gain profit. And a big example of that was Al Capone in Chicago.
Swinging times. This era was also known as the Jazz era. Jazz music was sweeping the nation and rapidly increasing in popularity. The flapper women were embracing urban ideas of womanhood, and hymnings were rising. This was what an independent woman was supposed to look like, according to some.
Between the wars was a period of prosperity and joviality between World War I and World War II. This time period was traumatic and wonderful. The recession had finally ended and the stock market was booming again. America had officially moved toward industrialization, a great source of wealth for the country. And the lost generation was settled in Europe. Expatriates, a person who lives outside the native country. Hemingway was included in this group of writers.
Modernism is a non-traditional language. Syntax and literary forms became increasingly popular and common. Pre-existing literary tradition had been challenged. The use of disjointed timelines became common. This was to show that not everything is linear and neat. The theme of freedom runs throughout the period.
Roots. These were stemmed from the free verse style of Walt Whitman's writing. These are some examples used. Oscar Wilde's prose poetry, Robert Browning's subversion of poetic self, Emily Dickinson's compressed poetic style. The Harlem Renaissance. Hundreds of thousands of African Americans were moving north to the big cities, and Harlem, New York became the largest urban black community. They suffered from overcrowding and poverty. This was the center of the literary movement known as the Harlem Renaissance. This was home to many writers and artists. The movement was led by well-educated African Americans with a sense of pride in African Americanism.
Some famous writers were Ernest Hemingway and Francis Scott Fitzgerald. These are the characteristics we're going to talk about.
Juxtaposition is two ideas or images that will not normally be compared or paired side by side but have been in literature or art, forcing the reader or viewer to reconsider their relationship through contrasting motifs or ideas. An example is She Was Sluggishly Alert.
A discontinuous narrative is a narrative that is not constrained by a linear timeline, a narrative that moves back and forth on a timeline.
Intertextuality was when two texts were directly related through allusion, comparison, or quotes from one another. Example, allusions to the Bible and many works are examples for intertextuality.
Some of these themes were the American dream, alienation of the individual, the search for freedom, and hollowness of upper-class society. Francis Scott Fitzgerald.
He was born in 1896 in St. Paul, Minnesota, to an upper-middle-class family. His father was Edward Fitzgerald of Irish and English ancestry. The first decade of his childhood was primarily spent in Buffalo, New York. Fitzgerald decided to stay in New Jersey to continue his artistic development at Princeton University. He dropped out of school to join the Army. Fitzgerald's legacy included work that inspired writers ever since he was first published.
Some of his novels include This Side of Paradise, The Beautiful and Damned, The Great Gatsby, Tender is the Night, and The Love of the Last Tycoon.
The Great Gatsby, first published by Scribner in April 1925.
The Great Gatsby was first published by Scribners in April 1925. The Great Gatsby received mixed reviews and sold very poorly in its first year. The book sold only 20,000 copies. And Modern Library Editorial Board voted in the 20th century that it was the best American novel and second best English language novel of the same time period. He began planning the novel in 1923, desiring to produce, in his words, something new, something extraordinary and beautiful. Ernest Hemingway.
He was born July 21st, 1899 in Oak Park, Illinois. He was the second of 6 kids, and his father was a doctor, and his mother liked education, books, music, and art. He lived in the woods, and it was very remote with nothing around but Indian villages. Whenever he was 17, he wrote for the Kansas City Star.
World War I and after. Hemingway's sense of war was heroic, brave, fun, and exciting. When he went to sign up, he was rejected at first due to poor eyesight. Instead, signed up as an ambulance driver for the Red Cross. His first assignment was to go to Italy. This assignment affected his view of war.
He started risking his life. He was severely hurt in an explosion trying to save wounded soldiers. He was taken to the hospital, 200 pieces of shrapnel in his leg. The war ended in 1918. He was still in the hospital when the war ended. He received a Medal of Bravery from the Italian Army. He fell in love while in the hospital with a Red Cross nurse by the name of Agnes.
The iceberg principle is if a writer of prose knows enough about what he is writing about, he may omit things that he knows, and the reader, if the writer is writing truly enough, will have a feeling of those things as strongly as though the writer has stated them. The dignity of movement of an iceberg is due to only 1/8 of it being above water. Ernest Hemingway, Death in the Afternoon.
He moved to Paris in his 20s as a foreign correspondent for the Toronto Star. He became a member of a group of expatriate Americans in Paris, later called the Lost Generation by Gertrude Stein. Stein hosted many salons for other expatriates to discuss literature and the arts.
In his end, his health began to deteriorate partly due to his heavy alcoholism. He was admitted to the Mayo Clinic for his mental health and was given shock treatments. He had much memory loss. He became unable to write like he did before. On July 2nd, 1961, he shot himself in the head.
Awards and accomplishments: Pulitzer Prize for The Old Man and the Sea, Nobel Prize for Literature, and American Academy of Arts and Letters Awards of Merit.
Some of his novels include A Farewell to Arms. The novel is about love affair during World War I. It became his first bestseller. A Movable Feast. This novel is a memoir about his beginning years and the struggles he faced as a young author. The memoir was published 3 years after Hemingway's death.
His short stories include A Clean, Well-Lighted Place, The Short, Happy Life of Francis Macomber, Indian Camp. Most of his stories consist of war and love.
Goodbye.